Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday, Women Seeking Wholeness Wednesday. This is Cherie Burton. I'm your host of Women Seeking Wholeness. And I am in Hawaii this week. I actually pre-recorded this episode and I love this episode. We recorded it during the holidays, actually, Sandra and I. She's just delightful and such a wealth of wisdom on the topic of the queen archetype. You've heard me talk about archetypes a lot because I love Jungian psychology. I love just this whole thing about the collective unconscious and how we pull from different streams of archetypal characters, just how it impacts us culturally and within our own bodies and our own psyches. And I love the queen archetype. I've been always just so drawn to it. So she has written an amazing book that explores this, and we'll get into it in our discussion. But just wanted to remind you that Stand, Speak, Shine School still has not filled up. That's standspeakshine.com. We have some spots left. We're journeying January 30th, so you've got a couple weeks to hop on. I hope that you'll take this year, this decade for that matter, but especially this year, to take inventory and celebrate your wins, your soul growth, your expansion. And if you want to take it to the next level, we're talking self-actualization. That's what the Stand, Speak, Shine School is all about. The caliber of women that have gathered to this point and what I know about them, holy cow. So you have to apply to get into this. I pretty much let everyone in. I just want to know why you're coming into it and why you're drawn to it, because I want to know what level you're playing at in your life. So again, put yourself first this year. Come align with other powerful, like-minded, truth-seeking women, and let's explore you. Let's get into your soul. Let's learn to hear your soul voice so you can stand in who you are, heal, express, and create in your own being, and then shine, gifting others with your own presence. That's what it's all about in the Stand, Speak, Shine School. Now, Sandra Rogers was connected to me through our mutual friend, Jennifer Selig, who has been a great mentor for me this last year. Jennifer has, and has started her own publishing company, Mandorla Books, Mandorla. Just some really meaty, cool topics. Sandra's book is called Inviting the Queen, an emerging archetype for women at midlife. I mean, this would apply to you even if you're not in midlife or even if you're in advanced life. But I love that she's able to pull in this whole thing around archetypes and how, we're all wanting to access more developed power, more skills to enhance and deepen our lives. So when you align with the queen archetype, this energy of the queen, you get to come into your full potential, lead a satisfying, more fuller, richer, more benevolent, just overall, just satisfying life. And this is a developmental stage that typically can come into a woman's life when she has lived and had enough experience with relationships, with the world. And so that's why they say midlife. But I think I've met some old souls who are already kind of there. I mean, they haven't even had to hit midlife, and they're knowing that there's something more for them to embrace royally. They want to step into a higher way of emoting and being. So if you've ever been curious why you feel so drawn to the crown, this will be a fascinating episode for you to listen to and learn from. So let's bring in psychotherapist and author, Sandra Rogers. Well, today we've got Sandra Rogers. Hi, how are you? It's great to have.
I'm good.
Someone was just speaking the language of if I could write a really amazing archetypal book, I would have chosen something extremely similar, eerily similar, I would say, to what you've put forward, which is Inviting the Queen, an emerging archetype for women at midlife. I consider myself midlife now because I hit 50 last year. And I just balked at that term, right? Like, what? That, because it's synonymous with aging and being old. So we're going to climb into what that means. But first, I'm just really, really curious. I mean, you have advanced degrees. You've been in the space of, this has probably got some meaning for it around you, aside from your academic pursuits and what you do with your clientele and whatnot. So how did the queen enter your life? How did this archetype of the queen, show up for you?
Well, she entered very suddenly. I'll tell you my origin story on this. I wrote my master's thesis on the crone archetype, and I'm talking about the paradigm of the maid, mother, and crone, which I'll come back to. But I wrote it on the crone, which is the old woman, and considered the third stage. And when I wanted to work with women in my practice using the crone as a method of getting into deeper work. And all I got from everyone I approached was, "Oh no, not me. I'm not a crone. Oh God, I hate that word. No, 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 no." So I got the point. It just didn't fly. So I puzzled over it for the next 20 years. Like, why doesn't this work? Why is no one wanting to do this? And one day it actually just kind of came to me in a flash. And that was that there is something missing, that there's another archetype that belongs here and that's missing. And immediately the name Queen came to mind. And I realized that was the missing archetype. And in that triple goddess paradigm, she belongs between the mother and the crone. And indeed, she's almost a melding of the two. And so I started with that and began to research it a little bit more and found that, yes, today women live about 30 years longer than their foremothers did at the turn of the 20th century. So we've got an extra 30 years. And to be the old woman for that long just doesn't make sense. And we're not old women. At 50, you're not an old woman. There's nobody who would say you are. And there are women at 75 and 80 who are not old women either, because of the way their lives are going and what they're doing in the world and internally. They're not there yet. So who are they? And what are the role models here? What is this queen archetype? So looking further, I saw that the queen was not only a developmental stage, but an archetypal energy as well. And so that's how the book started. I began to research this and talk to women and found that what I was talking about had validity for them.
Right.
And from that came the book, Inviting the Queen.
So you had to invite the queen in. I was going to say, like, you've had to invite that queen into your space to make it alive for you so you could give the voice to other women who are struggling with this whole crone thing. I mean, who came up with that?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you where it probably came from. It probably came from the fact that women didn't used to live this long. Life was much harder a century or two ago, and women raised families, maybe went through menopause, maybe didn't live long enough, but they died fairly young because they were physically worn out. Today, that's not so. We have a lot of things that contribute to our having longevity, and I think we all kind of know what those are. But now there's this extra 30 years, and there are no role models. There's not much awareness. So that was my point, was to bring some awareness to this, and actually giving it a name makes all the difference. You can't look for something or welcome something that you can't name. Things don't become alive until they're named. So when it became the queen, all of a sudden a whole array of information became available, and what that meant for a woman. Now with me, it came a little differently than I imagine it will happen with my readers. I did it more from an intellectual position than an emotional one, because I was writing a book. But then, I'm sorry, I'll be right back. And I kept looking for where is my emotional attachment here? When am I going to get out of my head, and when is this going to get into my heart? Well, it happened to me by actually writing the book. That was my process. And it happened subtly. It wasn't like all of a sudden in a blinding flash. It came on bit by bit as I wrote and developed it. And now I can look back and see how different I am than I was 7 years ago, because frankly, this took 7 years to do.
Well, 7 years is a completion cycle. I've just had that recent awareness.
That's true.
That I was in a dark night of the soul type life experience that's just was almost started about 6.5 years ago. So I figure I've got 6 more months ish. But no, that doesn't surprise me. I think when we're attuned to those divine patterns that typically come through as sacred geometry or numbers, very similar to the archetype. thing. If we're really paying attention, we'll see these patterns, we'll see these stages that occur even through seemingly unrelated events, that when we get through the completion cycle, we look back and say, oh, I can see how this was a constellation and a tapestry being woven for this to play itself out. I'm curious, with your
say that so well.
Thank you. So with your personal life, what would you say was like the apex point where you were like, okay, I reject this crone? Because I know you're maturing, you're a woman maturing, you're educated, you're obviously a truth seeker. What was there a pain point in your life or something that you walked through as a woman that gave rise to you wanting to, kind of flush this out a little bit more for yourself and for others?
Well, I think it came on very subtly. It wasn't a big event. But what kind of drove it was my interest and concern with power for women, because frankly, the queen is a power archetype. And we look at the world today. In the Western world, women do have a lot of privileges. They have a lot of rights, but they're still missing an awful lot of them too. And then in the third world, there are some horrific examples of women having no power over their own lives and sovereignty. So I've often been touched by that, and in my own life, feeling powerless has been something that I've experienced. And so wanting to know a little bit more about personal power and how you can use it in the best way, not in a dominating way, but in a way that benefits you and benefits the people around you, led me to looking at power. And actually, in the first part of the book, I give a brief history of Western women and where we've come from and since the dawn of agriculture up until the present day. And the overriding, seems to me the overriding problem with women having power is the patriarchy. Because the patriarchy is set up to keep power in the hands of very few, and they're all male. There are also many men who are not given power in the patriarchal system too. They're still marginalized. But certain men who have the means to command power are part of the patriarchy. So that was a real challenge for me to write, because the more I read about it, the angrier I got. And it was hard not to transfer that anger onto the men in my life who are wonderful human beings who do not abuse their power. But this patriarchal power is present. It's maybe under the surface for some people, and for others it's in their face. But until we become aware of that and how it holds us back, we're not going to be able to do anything. So researching and writing that part was kind of the apex for me. It engendered a lot of anger at what we've gone through. And then also looking at how do we change it? And you can only change by making internal changes first.
Right.
So we have to start finding our power. We have to start behaving in ways that support that. For example, one of the things I became aware of is how much we as women often denigrate other women. And we do it in a way we would never talk this way about a man. But it's not unusual to hear a woman say something like, I'm going to go back a few years, looking at Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State. A woman might say, well, she's done a really great job as Secretary of State. It's a shame all that travel and that work has taken such a toll on her looks. There'll always be that sort of give a compliment, take it away a little bit. And we do that in many different ways. To become aware of that is to reconfirm your own sense of personal power and thereby the power of other women. So we need not compete with each other. There's plenty to go around.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, we as women, I think we're awakening to the fact that, I'm a self-ascribed feminist. I wouldn't have even embraced that term until probably 3 or 4 years ago, because it had such a nasty, dirty, wicked, angry connotation. But now
Yes.
I see it in a
Yes.
way that of power, like you were saying, how have women been disempowered? How have patriarchal regimes affected the developing psyche of a young girl and a woman and even a crone, if we could even
Yes.
categorize that? I mean, so the fact that we get to awaken to this, not only how we've injured the feminine in women, but also in men, because many of those patriarchal structures are men crying out for their feminine sides to heal, not knowing how to emote or
Oh,
express and have that flow in their lives. So it's a planetary crisis, but I think many of us are awakening to it. And so I know a lot of male feminists, in fact, my two oldest sons, ages 23 and 18, consider themselves feminist. But it's
oh,
just,
that's great.
yeah.
Love that.
And it's just like, when we're talking, let's go to archetypes for a minute, because it is such a hard term
Okay.
to define. And when I talked to Dr. Jaffa Vernon
It is.
Frank about a woman's body and how some of these archetypal patterns show up culturally and have from the beginning of time and how they play out in our lives, how would you categorize or define an archetype, especially in the context of, let's just say, a queen?
Okay. Cherie, you asked the toughest question
I
of all.
know, aren't I
I have
just
spent
like,
so
well,
much
I've got your
time. No,
book
no,
in
it's
front
a
of me,
good
and I know,
question.
I know how Carl Jung defines it, and I could just read it right off the page of your book that I'm like literally looking at right now, because he's
That's
kind of the father of, for me,
cool.
for many of us, the father of the archetypal, um, psychology type thing. So
Yes.
how do you define it?
Well, I would really could I invite you just to read that little part? It's
I
not too long because
will.
I don't have
Yes,
it
I
in
know.
front
I
of
put you
me.
on the spot because I couldn't even just
Okay.
rattle off anything that sounded remotely as powerful as this. But he said, archetypes are mythological associations, the
Yeah.
motifs, motifs, and images that
Uh-huh.
can spring up anew anytime, anywhere, independently of historical tradition or migration. So that's kind of deep, but he's like, oh, someone just rang my doorbell. Oh, it's the UPS guy delivering some stuff.
Oh,
We're good. But he viewed
okay.
structures as reflective of the whole psyche and suggested it is possible to describe this unconscious content in rational scientific language, but in this way, one entirely fails to express its living character. So it's sort of this
Yeah,
alive mythological thing we associate the motifs and images that come, like to our minds without needing to dig too deep, right? They're just alive for us. In your
thank you for reading that.
yeah, in your work with the Queen, how would you define her archetype? How would you put her together? Because you said so we have these stages of a woman's life based in Greek mythology: maid, mother, crone.
Right.
You said you would insert Queen in between mother and crone, right? Because crone is just this aging,
Yes. Yes.
almost sadly should be the matriarch, but is often culturally obsolete because of our views on aging and how we don't let the elderly contribute as much as we should culturally. But in terms of this queen who's
Absolutely.
somewhere between the mother, I'm going to call the crone the matriarch because I just hate the word crone. So how, but the queen's kind of a matriarch too, right? She's already had children.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But she may not have. I mean, I don't exclude women who have not had children from the mother archetype, which is the one that precedes it.
Because
I can't.
You have not had children.
I don't have
correct?
children.
Yeah.
I have not had children. I now have a lot of stepchildren and step grandchildren, but it's not the same as having had children and raising them. But what I can also lay claim to is that in my life, I have nurtured, well, actually, this book is my baby. I call it my baby because it seemed to follow a lot of the things that happen with gestation and birth and then beginning to raise a young child. So I often go back and think of it that way. But any woman who, besides raising biological children, may foster children. She may have a career that she has nurtured, a business she has given birth to and nurtured, an artistic career, or even a spiritual path. All of those things are forms of creation. And that's what the mother is about. She is the creatrix, I think is the word they use.
Yeah.
So that's what that is. And the queen is a continuation of that, but from a higher level. Because by the time one has finished with the mother archetype and moved towards the queen, you're at a certain age, you have a certain amount of life experience and knowledge and understanding of what's good for you and what you feel is good for the people in your world. And you want to contribute to that. So again, you're nurturing, teaching, but it's from a higher level. It's not that day-to-day hands-on kind of mothering that women raising children experience. This is a little, I always think of it as being first in middle management and then going up to being a CEO. Mm-hmm. So your perspective is different. You have a higher perspective. You see further and broader than you do when you're confined to a small family unit where you're raising children or raising your career. Now you're looking at the world. You're looking at your extended family. You're seeing what's going on, what benefit you might bring, and finding ways to do that honor other people's boundaries. You can't take over other people's lives. And you're not the queen that tells people what to do. So I think that's always the thing to be concerned about, is not to take it on as an inflated kind of attitude about what your power is. You're there to serve, but you have greater capacity now.
Right.
And there's one thing I always want to emphasize, and that is inviting the queen is a choice. It's not something that you just automatically go to. Some women may not want to do this, and that's fine. It's their lives. They're entitled to make their choices. So, but if you do choose to invite the queen, you first have to become aware of her and what possibilities she brings to you. So let me give you an example. A woman with adult children who are married and perhaps have families of their own. A woman in the queen energy can now look at that and say, okay, what's needed in my world here? Do my adult children need some help? Would that be welcome? And if it is, what could I do? Well, maybe they want to buy their first home and you're in a position to help them financially, and it's okay. You're not running their lives for them. You may decide that you want to help in some way, either by helping them with their financing or doing something that makes it more possible for them to buy their first home. You may see your grandchild who looks like he's going to do very, very well, and he wants a college education, or he will want a college education. You might want to start that college fund now because you have the means to do so, and you can see a coming need. So those are very, very practical ways in which you can be the queen within your family. You can do similar things within your community if that's what you choose. We all have different places we want to be. Some of us just want to stay within our family. Others want to be more out in the world. And some women really want to make changes in the global community as well. So it's whatever the woman wants and is skilled and able to do that will help her decide what to do in the queen energy.
And I think the clearer you are about, hey, this is what I want in my life. I meet a lot of women who've just shut that down because they've made it about taking care of those around them. And therefore there's this double standard we have that how dare this mother archetype, whether she has children or not, put the needs of these dependents, quote unquote dependents or children, equal to her own needs, if not less than her own needs, right? Like, how can you show up as the queen or the radiant mother, if you will, if you haven't honored, the way you hold yourself, the way you dress, your inner work, your desires, the cultivation of those, this benevolence, I think your children are more served by seeing you step into an archetype of you could say royalty, you could say self-honoring, but they're more served by you embodying that and setting those clear boundaries.
Yes.
Than by you just making it all about them and scrambling in your queendom to meet their needs at the expense of your own.
You're absolutely right. You know the old saying, you have to feed yourself first before you can feed anyone else. So if you're not taking good care of yourself, you can't be the queen. And taking care of yourself may be physical, it may be emotional, be mental or spiritual. All of those things. You have to have the good. You have to be able to bring the goods, and not just give and give and give, where you become depleted. That never, no good queen would ever allow that to happen.
Here's another great.
You have to fill your bowl first.
You do, yeah. Here's another great. I think you even quoted Wikipedia in your book. Their definition of archetype is a statement or pattern of behavior, a prototype upon which others are copied, patterned, or emulated. So when we're talking about this queen archetype, what are her patterns? What would we want if she's the prototype? Because like you said, some people it's just like, hey, whatever that I don't feel called to invite the queen archetype into my life. That doesn't call to me. That doesn't speak to me. I personally, and I've told you this in another conversation we had, I have been after this archetype on my deepest psyche since I was a very young girl. I watched pageants all the time. For Halloween, I was really jealous because my sister got to be a queen one year and I wanted to be, to the point where I had put that down. I always wanted to do a pageant just because I wanted to that was the closest cultural association I had to a queen. And I never did. And then after I got married and had my first 3 kids, I got introduced to that there were pageants for married women. Someone kind of talked to me about doing it. And I went through this whole, all of my 30s pretty much were refining myself and competing and then winning the title and then directing pageants and becoming a pageant coach. So I really climbed into unknowingly, right? I didn't even understand archetypes back then. I had a psych degree, but I wasn't really into depth psychology like I am now. And now understanding the work of Carl Jung and Marion Woodman and all these great pioneers who've taught us about the power of how these driving archetypes literally guide us in their prototypal patterning, right, into our life mission. Now that I'm at midlife, because all that I was Mrs. Utah probably about 15 years ago now. And so now that I look back on that, I'm like, I am more seasoned. I don't look at the queen the same way that I did then. And I can now be at a quieter place with it and sit on that metaphorical throne, although I still have 2 young children, and go and to kind of take inventory of what's played out over the last 50 years of my life and actually ask myself for the first time, what do I really want the next half of my life to look like? What do I, literally what do I want to create in my queendom? And that feels empowering. That's the queen going, excuse me, this is my domain.
Right. You've got it. You do have.
Yeah. What have you found? What has been your professional work? I know you're LMFT. So what have you, I'm assuming you've had some association with many women and have walked through some similar pain points with women.
Well, you're so right. And I do tend to work a lot with individuals, with women, or with women individually, I should say. What I found mostly in my work is that women generally come into therapy talking about relationships because really we're kind of wired that way. And they usually come to therapy talking about their relationship with their significant other and then also with their children. And often what comes up is, in a sort of subtle way, is they're not feeling any sense of personal power, any sense of what I call sovereignty, being able to choose for yourself and not make it work for somebody else, or not try and make it work for someone else. Let that be their job. But to complete yourself so that you have that innate feeling of having personal agency. And without that, we really can't go anywhere. We're still little girls asking daddy to take care of us. And that's just the opposite of the queen. The queen is happy to have wonderful relationships. She wants them, but she is not going to give herself up to make them work. And so that's what I have found. And I have found that with women, the ones who are successful in therapy get that idea. The others who cling to the idea that they can't be anything without having a good romantic relationship or a good relationship with their children and being recognized by others have a much harder time because they haven't done the internal work, and they're looking for others to validate them. So it's the self-validation, I think, that becomes maybe the most important part of being a queen. Mm. And feeling like you have power. You have power that comes from you, comes from within, and it's yours, and nobody can take it from you. And that's beautiful. To allow someone to take it from you is kind of the worst kind of psychological damage you can do to yourself.
Right. Just to externalize your power, give it away. I think that's why the queen is so powerful, is because she's sovereign. And I talk a lot about soul sovereignty in this podcast. I pretty much bring it up almost every single episode because I think we're coming into an era where we're realizing that we cannot thrive as a people and in families and in structures like religions and governments and whatnot, academia, until we allow individuation. And until and I see this especially playing out in religious structures where there's an externalized authority. So you're giving away your power. You're waiting for permission. You're also having your worthiness judged. And those are all something a queen would not do. Literally would not stand for.
No. No, she would not.
So we don't have this
because she wouldn't be a queen anymore.
We just don't have, she's been dethroned in most structures, except for maybe England's royalty. But, even that is, interestingly, probably going to shift soon. But the power of the crown, if you will, one of my favorite Netflix series. I love it. So one of the things I like about your work is that you broke it down with the chakras. So every chapter you hit a chakra of one of the 7 chakras. How did that? I mean, because that's with you're a licensed marriage and family therapist, and you're also a depth psychologist. And I noticed you're also into transpersonal psychology, so you would know about chakras, right? How did that play? What was your aha there about bringing the chakras in?
Well, I'll tell you, I started doing yoga. I did yoga. I've done yoga now for probably close to 40 years. And I've particularly enjoyed Kundalini yoga, which does work with the chakras. So I was very familiar with them. And as I was writing, when I wrote the first part of the book, that's all the theory and the history. It doesn't describe the queen. And as a writer, I'm simply thinking, how am I going to describe the queen other than writing chapter upon chapter full of adjectives? How boring is that? And so I thought, well, I need a device where I can show the queen. So the chakra system came to mind, and I played with it, and it worked. At least I feel it worked, because the chakras, being, in case any of our listeners are not that familiar, it comes mostly from Hinduism, and it's a belief of energy centers in the body that distribute energy throughout the body in certain areas. And they start with the root chakra and go up to the crown, and they cover all parts of us. So within those body parts are connections that they may be just mental, emotional connections. They may be very physical. I'm not the one who can say. But our root chakra, our bottom chakra, is connected to the earth, is connected with means of survival, food, money, personal identity, nationality, ethnicity. So they're kind of tribal in some ways. Mm-hmm. So I put the queen there, and I tried to examine her within that realm of attributes, I guess. And that's how I actually wrote it. I did that with each of the chakras. So the second chakra is the sexual chakra. And so how is the queen, and it's sexual and creative. So how is the queen with creativity? How is she in her sexual life or in her feelings about sexuality? Again, the next one up is the power chakra, the personal power. How does the queen deal with power? Then you go to the heart, which is love and compassion. How is the queen seen with love and compassion? How does she interact with those? Going all the way up through the next three, which is the throat, communication, the third eye chakra, which is intuition, and the seventh is the crown chakra, which is our connection with the divine. So how does the queen, what are her qualities within each of those settings? And that's how I wound up doing it. And it married quite well, I think. I was very happy with using it that way.
I really enjoyed how you laid that out and broke it down, because I've taken chakra classes. I have my 200-hour yoga teacher training. And I love how you put these together and actually are very survival, even to those lower chakra centers, right? Creativity and groundedness to the earth. And to me, those are so feminine. They're just it's so much about feminine embodiment. And and because we have a lot of us just been in survival mode, I would say archetypally and culturally in the collective unconscious, it's kind of like Carolyn May says, we all have the virgin and the prostitute archetypes both working at us, right?
Yes.
And we have the child, and we also, have the crone, and those are all playing out in us, and we're trying to sort everything. So our very survival as feminine beings in those lower chakra centers, and I like how you started there, because to me, it has been about embodiment. As women, we have rejected our bodies, and we've played into these disempowerment models where we just cannot find our safe space on the earth. And that has lent itself largely to my stand, speak, shine. Stand is the lower centers. It is the, getting out of or feeling that groundedness, I guess you could say. But as you move up to the higher centers where, it becomes more about expression, that's the speak part for me. That's in this, moving from stand to speak or express, which is that throat center. So receiving and giving love, massive. I know you talked about that when you went into the heart in the fourth chakra area with the queen. And I'm just going to read this because I think it's a great synopsis here on page 102 in your book. The queen does not measure the love she gives and receives, but lets it flow. It's not defined by the love she gives and receives. She is not defined by the love she gives or receives. She already knows who she is. She can hold the tension of the opposites. She can feel pain, grief, even despair, while still able to strategize how to overcome or live with the obstacles. She can love bravely and freely without fearing the pain that the loss of a love would bring, because she has already felt mortally wounded in love and has survived, and she knows that she will continue to survive and love. I just really liked that synopsis of the fortune. But as we
thank you for reading that.
Yeah, well, as we move into the expression, which is those higher, the throat, the third eye, and then of course the crown chakra, which is the ultimate queen chakra, right? The higher, crown chakra connection to the divine. A lot of people say to heaven, or just that spiritual connection. How, because I know a lot of that has to do with our mental clarity. And I don't know about you, but I'm sure you've seen this in your work. I see it all the time. Brain fog, lack of clarity, confusion. What's next? What's a lot of I hear a variation on the theme of, please tell me what my purpose is. And I really think that the queen archetype is the purpose for many women. It's like, can you crown yourself? Can you sit on your own throne? Can you want what you want? And like you said, it's moving from middle management and people having a boss tell you and dictate, an authority figure dictate to you, versus you being the CEO, you going to that executive level, right?
Right.
You offer some really practical things in each of the chakra chapters, but they all deal in like journaling, meditation. But one thing I was really intrigued with, because you did talk about visualization, was the active imagination. Can you, I know that's a depth psychology thing, but can you share with the listeners what that is? Because I really, really feel like that could be a massive, grossly underlooked tool for women, because we don't allow ourselves to just play in that space. So can you explain what that is and how you...
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Well, let me just talk about active imagination to begin with. It's a way of working and accessing your own subconscious. It's a Jungian technique, and it can be done in a somewhat simple manner. You actually conduct an interview with yourself or with the queen, your own queen. And you can do it just in an interview format. And I've done it by either handwriting or on the computer. I will write my question, and then I will wait and listen for the queen's answer. And something comes to mind inevitably. I'm not hearing voices. I'm not getting visions, but I am getting something. Some thoughts will come up, and I'll just start to write. It doesn't have to make any sense at first. Usually it doesn't make any sense at first. Just keep writing. Don't criticize yourself. Just go with it. Soon you will start getting material from a deeper place within yourself, and which we often call the subconscious. And you will start to get your answer that way. You can do it in lots of ways, not just with the queen. You can do it if you wanted to talk to your younger self. You could do this active imagination with a figure in a dream. You might say you had a dream about a handsome man on a white horse. So you have an interview. Oh, handsome man on the white horse, you showed up my dream last night. What do you want to tell me? And then you sit there and listen. And you'll get impressions. It'll come in your own way. There's no right way around it. Write it down. So when and do it for a while, and just kind of stick with the discomfort of maybe not making sense, or you're feeling a little foolish. Just go ahead and do it anyway. You're not going to show it to anybody. It doesn't matter. And then when you go back and read it, you can be amazed at what will have come out. Things that you didn't know you knew will come up. And that's stuff that's just below the level of conscious awareness. And it's valuable and it's rich. And we get great answers that way. You can even use it to help you solve problems. You can address the problem and write what you're struggling with, and ask the problem why it's giving you this, and hear what comes back. Write it down. Mm-hmm. After you've done a few of these, you'll be amazed at what you're getting. It's a little bit like dream interpretation, but it's a waking dream. It's not a sleeping dream.
Right.
Does that help?
Yes, and you're directing it. Whereas sometimes with dream interpretation in the depth psychology arena, it's like you don't have as much control, I guess.
Yes, sometimes, yeah.
Wow, it's powerful.
But all of that internal.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, when you had mentioned that we have to do the inner work, the queen gets to a space in her life where she's like, okay, if I am going to, reign, rule, whatever, and benevolently, of course, I have to take stock. I have to look at what's been created to this point in me, inside of me, and taking that out and examining that, doing the inner work. We have to do these things you suggest: the journaling, the meditation, the active imagining,
right.
All of that stuff. We have to dive into practices where we examine our psyches. So when you talk about
Absolutely.
the queen, I love the whole title is about inviting the queen. So how do you invoke or call this archetype in? Is it done through active imagining, or do you just make a decision and say, I want this influence in my life. I want to have this. I want to be this in my own sovereign space and in my own domain. How do you go
I
about
think
doing
I
that?
think you're on. I think you just said it. You make the decision. It is a conscious decision, and it's not one for every woman. Some women may not want to do this. Some women they're just this isn't where they are yet, and there's nothing bad about that. But if you are ready to invite the queen, then you do it. You make a conscious decision, and you may do it in your meditation. You may do it in prayer. You may do it just in your self-reflection. However you work is perfect. Nobody can tell you this is right, this is wrong. But you go ahead and invite her. And you stay conscious about it, and you continue to do your emotional / spiritual work that you've been doing that got you there. You continue to do that because we all, to stay alive and vital, need to do that, and not stop and say, "Oh, well, I'm done." We're never done. We're done when our toes are up and and they're about to take us out the door.
Yeah, I went to.
There's no end to that.
I just finished a 2-day retreat with some fellow business associates, and they had quoted, I'm not sure exactly who said it, but you will never get there, but you will die trying. What they're kind of saying is that when we are really connected to our own cause, our own just cause, and the legacy that we want to leave behind. Like you said, some people aren't really as invested in that. They just love life and they love people, and that they're not attached to any kind of legacy, if you will, or being an influencer, if you will. Some people, and I would include you and I in this category, and probably a lot of our listeners, have this vision of being so connected to lifting the consciousness, serving, blessing humanity, healing others. And we as women, get really attached to that. And it's really benevolent and beautiful, but we don't direct it inward. We don't take that same energy and put it into our own being with the same fervor and determination and ambition. So, but the queen, she has refined that, or she is refining that process. And she realizes, hey, if I'm going to show up as a powerful, beautiful, wise leader in my queendom, there are things that I need to do to take care of myself in order to embody that. And that realization is massive.
It is
massive, massive.
It's huge. And it takes away that whole idea of, well, I have to take care of others first. It's wonderful to take care of others, but you have to take care of yourself first. You know, if you don't fund yourself, you can't help anyone else because you don't have enough to give.
Right.
So you really have to do that. Like today, I'll tell you quite honestly, I'm a little nervous about talking in public. Most people are. So I was a little nervous approaching our conversation. I sat and did my work with the Queen to the point where I felt confident. I have something I want to say, something that other people want to hear. And it took it all the way out of how will I sound? How will I be okay? It took it out of that kind of ego-based judgment and to here, I can do this because I know this and I feel confident in it. The Queen is at my back. She's got my back, so I can do it. You know, there's in the book, there's a little ritual at the end that I find very powerful. And they're just their instructions on how to do it. And you can do it all kinds of ways, but at the end of the ritual, there's a self-coronation ritual.
I was going to ask about that because I do something very similar in one of my programs. So I was very curious to read about this. I think it's amazing. So it's a self-coronation ritual, right? Crowning yourself.
it is very simple. And when I do workshops, I have the participants do this, but I give them little tiaras from the party store. I mean, I can't afford the crown jewels of England, but so I can't afford the party store crowns. And they simply crown themselves. And that's very important, that they are crowning themselves. Nobody else is doing it to them or for them. They are doing it. And they say something along the lines of, with this crown, I forgot my wording exactly.
I'll read it. I've got it right here.
Okay, go ahead.
So and then you insert your name. So I, Cherie, having recognized my own unique talents and abilities and having connected with my own feminine divinity, do take this crown for myself. I do this on, and then you put the date. So today is, this is not going to air in December, but it will air in January, but today is December 12th. 2019, in the presence of my own sister queens, proclaiming myself to be a queen among queens. So be it. Love it.
Yes. I like it too. Thank you. And it also kind of addresses this idea that we compete with each other, which is one of the really bad things that we need to root out, is any ideas that we have to compete with other women. Because that's an old trick. That's an old trick that patriarchy has given us to divide and conquer. You can see that one in politics all the time. But beyond that, there's that I am able to give this to myself and do it without any apology. It is my right, and I can honor myself in this way. And I had one woman in a workshop who, we did this, and then she called me a couple of days later, and she said, I have to tell you that I took my little plastic tiara home, and I wore it the next day while I was vacuuming, and it changed the whole thing. It changed how I felt about vacuuming. It changed how I felt about myself in that moment. Ritual really does kind of bring things into our present reality, and in a very, very powerful way. That's why ritual has always been with us. It's a great tool.
Yeah, and very much connects us to those archetypal patterns and those motifs and figures, characters. It's absolutely powerful. Well, Sandra, thank you so much for this really delightful conversation. And I think your work is really important because, I just look at your beautiful picture and listen to your wisdom. You're so far from being a crone. And that you've rejected it so vehemently is really inspiring, because you're bringing all of us more information about how we can. I didn't realize that we live 30 years longer than our foremothers, but
I didn't either.
Well, I look at pictures of like my great grandma at my age or my grandma, and I'm like, oh, yeah.
She looked really old, right?
She looked a lot older.
Yeah.
And actually both my grandmothers lived well into my 40s. So, they were beautiful women and vibrant and all these things. But when I look at the pictures of them when they were 50, you could tell that they'd lived a harder life. They were in the Great Depression era, both of them. And so anyway, I find that super fascinating, that really when they say, 50 is the new 35, it's actually the new 20.
It is.
Because we live 30 years.
I think we're a little more mature, but yeah, it's very different.
Yes,
it is. You make a very good point. So, and the crone is not to be resisted. I mean, there is a point where we do become old women, and there's learning there. There are benefits there. There are riches there when that time comes. But I don't think it comes as early as the old paradigm shows it.
Yeah, and
there's this time of vitality.
Yes, exactly. There's a window. And this is where I'm always telling women, like, find your vitality, because at some point that window will close and it becomes less about contribution, right? So that's kind of how I see the transition from mother and queen to crone, is the contribution is diminished because of health reasons. And so it's not that she can't have joy, and it's just that her health limits her in her ability to contribute. And it just then becomes about loving her family, which everyone should leave their life in love with their family and just being served.
Oh,
Being served.
that's a beautiful thought. Oh, Cherie, I love your thought on that. It's really
Only reason
really
I know
beautiful.
that I have this is because because my last child was born when I was 46, and
Wow.
she's 5 now, and she came through adoption, and her brother did too. He's a year and a half older than she is, and so I'm going to have these children later in life that I'm hoping take care of me, right? But I will always have a house full of children
Yeah.
because we have 2 sets of kids, really. I mean, I have 3 college students, and then I have these younger 2 that there's 12 years between them and their next sibling. But it's been interesting. And I talked to you about this on the phone. I told you a little bit about my adoption stories with them. They are teaching
Yeah.
me that it's not my time yet to sit back. Like I'm redefining
No.
what 50 is and what being in your 50s and probably 60s, 70s, and 80s. And that doesn't mean that I have to subscribe to like having no gray hair or wrinkles. It just means this is a different era for women. And for some reason, the universe decided to gift me in 2 separate private adoptions with these 2 younger children who are teaching me that I don't have to be defined by the chronological clock calendar. And so it's been interesting. It's been great to because I won Mrs. Utah when I was 35, and it was a season of just really, really intense self-refinement, very intense. And so that's kind of merging the wisdom with the physicality is sort of always been my life goal of that true embodiment and showing up in a space of love, which I think you just illustrate so beautifully in your book. Is the whole goal is not, the whole queen archetype isn't like she's leagues above everyone and she's so much more beautiful and she's so much more royal or she's so separate. She's with the people and she's of the people. And that's a distinction I think many people just, kind of dismiss when they think about that queen archetype.
Yeah. I think that's something I mentioned in the book, that I named some living women who I think embody the queen energy. And I think that the thought has always been that these are exceptional women, and the ones I mentioned are exceptional. People like Bill Gates's wife. I'm sorry to identify her that way.
Yeah, Melissa
or Melanie. Anyway, you know who I'm talking about. Jean Houston is another woman that I love her. Embodies that. Yeah, she's great. But these women, they are exceptional women. But embodying the queen is not for only exceptional women. Women who have lived good lives but haven't done anything that's going to get their name in the paper still can embody the queen. You don't have to be someone who's divinely tapped by God to have this role. It's available to any woman who wants to do it. And you don't have to be recognized as exceptional. You are exceptional just by virtue of what you do and what you think and how you are in the world.
And because it's human woman, that's enough.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for this really enlightening conversation, Sandra. And I'm going to be recommending your book to people. I might even put it on the required reading list for those who enter my program, because this is hot off the presses. Okay. You just published this through Mandela Books.
It just came out about 3 weeks ago, and it's on Amazon.com in both Kindle and paperback versions. And I'd also like to invite your listeners to check my website, which is www.sandrarogerslmft.com, and see who I am and more about the book and more about what I do and my philosophy. I think they might enjoy it. And I want to thank you for inviting me to talk with you today. I've really enjoyed it.
I've loved it. Thank you, Sandra. Sandra, right? It's not Sandra. It's Sandra. Sandra. Beautiful.
Sandra. I had an English husband. He pronounced it that way, so that's the way it stayed.
Awesome. Anyway. Beautiful. Thanks, Sandra. achieving a bolder, deeper psychological realization sort of broadens your relevance in this world. You have to invite it, right? It doesn't just like magically show up. You have to be proactive. The universe is bound. God is bound around what you choose, what you want, and what you ask for. We are living longer. We have more time on the earth, as Sandra has reminded us, 3 decades longer than our foremothers. So through some of these things she suggested, like journaling and meditation and visualization and self-coronation rituals, a very similar thing I do in the Stand, Speak, Shine school with my participants is diving into self-ritual. And you got to crown yourself, right? No one else is really going to do that for you. And using active imagination and using your energy centers of your body, there's so much that we can do to actively create and invite in a higher way of being. Your soul is already divine. Your soul is already a queen. And really, the sooner that you come to realize that, the more powerful the results you receive in your life, the more adept you become at manifesting. Have an absolutely beautiful rest of your week. And we will talk to you next Wednesday on Women Seeking Wholeness.